The sun was a searing, relentless orb in the cloudless sky, its light glinting off the desert sand and turning the air into a shimmering, heat-drenched mirage, a place where time seemed to slow down to a crawl, and every breath was a dusty, heavy effort. And Alara guided her rented car toward the border checkpoint, her hands clutching the steering wheel with a damp, nervous grip, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of anxiety that had been building for the past 50 miles, ever since she saw the first sign for the crossing. A simple, stark warning of what lay ahead. She had been on the road for what felt like an eternity. A long, solitary journey from the city. A journey to visit her aging parents, who lived in a small, quiet town just across the line. And she had always hated this part of the trip. The sterile, impersonal nature of the checkpoint. The cold, professional stares of the agents. The invasive questions that felt like an assault on her privacy. And today, that familiar unease was magnified by 1,000 degrees, a knot in her stomach that would not loosen. Her accent, a soft, melodic lilt that came from her childhood in a different land, a place of lush green hills and ancient stone, was always a source of quiet self-consciousness for her, a marker that set her apart and made her feel like an outsider in a world that demanded a uniform blandness. And she had tried over the years to smooth it out, to make her vowels sound more American. But it was a part of her very essence, and she knew she could not truly change it. And as she neared the booth, she took a deep breath, preparing herself for the inevitable scrutiny, the careful inspection of her passport and her face, the questions that would be asked in a clipped, non-nonsense tone that would make her feel like a person of interest, a person under suspicion, even though she had nothing to hide, absolutely nothing at all. The car crawled forward until it came to a stop at the designated line, a bright yellow stripe painted on the scorched asphalt, and the window of the booth slid open with a hiss, revealing the stern face of a man with a tired, weary look in his eyes. His name tag read, Agent Miller, and next to him, a younger, more eager-looking agent was leaning over, a smirk already playing on his lips as he sized her up, and he was Agent Rodriguez, a man who clearly found a great deal of amusement in the power his uniform afforded him. And the combination of the two of them made her feel an instant sense of dread, a premonition of a difficult encounter, an encounter that was about to turn from routine to something else entirely. Agent Miller took her passport without a word, his fingers barely brushing hers, his expression a blank wall of indifference, and he held it up to the light, his eyes scanning the photo, then her face, then back to the photo, a silent, meticulous comparison that felt like a judgment, and Alara waited, her hands still clutching the wheel, the fabric of her dress feeling like it was sticking to her skin in the oppressive heat. And then Agent Rodriguez spoke, his voice a low, theatrical drawl, a parody of her own accent. "And what is the purpose of your visit today, madam?" he said. His words stretched out, his tone dripping with a sarcasm that was as thick as the humid air, and he looked at Agent Miller, who did not even flinch, his eyes remaining fixed on the document, a silent accomplice to the cruel game that was about to begin. Alara's heart sank, a heavy stone dropping to the bottom of her stomach, but she forced herself to remain calm, to respond with the simple truth. Her voice was a little shaky but clear. "I am visiting my parents. They are living in a small town just past the border," she said, her words carefully chosen, her gaze fixed on a point just above Agent Miller's head, trying to project a confidence she did not feel. And Agent Rodriguez chuckled, a short, sharp sound that was full of mockery, and he leaned even further out of the window, his smirk widening as he said, "Your parents, you say, and they have the same, lovely accent as you do, I suppose." And Agent Miller finally looked up, a small, barely perceptible smile playing on his lips, a sign that he was in on the joke, a sign that her humiliation was a source of amusement for them both. The questions continued, each one a new opportunity for them to mimic her, to twist her words, to make her feel small, to make her feel like a child, and they asked about the duration of her stay, about her profession, about the contents of her single bag in the back seat, and with each answer, Agent Rodriguez would repeat it back to her in a sing-song voice, making a show of his mimicry, and the sound was like a physical blow, a repeated slap in the face that she could not stop, a humiliation she could not escape, and she wanted to scream at them, to tell them that they had no right to treat her this way, that her accent was a part of her and not a weakness, but the words would not come. Her throat felt tight. A lump of shame and frustration lodged deep inside her. A feeling of utter helplessness. Agent Miller finally put her passport down on the counter and stamped it with a loud, resounding thud, and he did not look at her. He simply pushed the document back toward her with a flick of his wrist, a dismissive gesture that said she was nothing more than a nuisance, a minor inconvenience in his day. And he said in a flat voice, "All right, you are good to go. Have a nice visit, and try not to get lost." The last part of the sentence was delivered with a sarcastic emphasis that was clearly meant to sting, and Agent Rodriguez let out a final, triumphant laugh, a sound that made her ears burn with hot shame. And she reached for her passport, her fingers fumbling with it as she tried to put it away and start the car, to just get out of this place, to just escape their cruel, judgmental gaze. And as she was fumbling, a sudden, powerful roar of an engine sounded behind her, a sound that made both of the agents straighten up, their expressions suddenly shifting from arrogant amusement to a tense, wary alertness. The vehicle that pulled up was a black, heavily tinted SUV, a vehicle that was clearly a government-issued model, something far more serious than their dusty patrol cars, and the windows were so dark that she could not see who was inside, but she could feel the power of its presence, a silent, intimidating force that was now looming just a few feet behind her. And the back door opened, and a man stepped out. A man with a commanding presence and an air of authority that filled the air. And he was tall. His shoulders were broad, and his dark suit was perfectly tailored. He did not wear a uniform, but something about his posture and the way he moved spoke of a rank far above the two agents in the booth. And his face was a chiseled mask of quiet purpose. His eyes were sharp and intelligent as they scanned the area, taking in every detail, every nuance of the scene, and a sudden, sharp intake of breath came from Agent Miller, a sound that was so filled with fear and respect that it made Alara look at the man more closely. And she felt a shock run through her as she recognized him, her husband, the love of her life, the man who was the absolute rock and foundation of her world, a man who she had no idea was going to be here, in this place, at this very moment. He did not look at her yet. He simply walked past her car, his gaze fixed on the two agents in the booth, and Agent Miller and Agent Rodriguez stood at attention, their postures rigid and military, their faces a mask of utter professionalism, all traces of their earlier mockery completely gone, replaced by a fear that was palpable, an almost physical thing that hung in the air between them. And the senior agent, her husband, stopped just in front of the booth, his hands clasped behind, his back, his body a monument of quiet, unyielding authority, and he simply looked at them, his eyes traveling from Agent Miller to Agent Rodriguez. And the silence was deafening, a thick, suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb every other sound, every whisper of the wind, every hum of an engine. And Alara sat there in her car, her heart pounding with a mixture of confusion and a sudden, incredible relief. A relief so overwhelming, it felt like a tidal wave, a sense that everything was going to be all right now, that her husband was here, and he would not let them hurt her anymore. He would not let them mock her. And she saw the realization dawn on the faces of the two agents, as they looked at her husband and then at her, their eyes widening in a slow, horrible moment of dawning comprehension. It was Agent Rodriguez who broke first, a small, barely audible gasp escaping his lips, a sound of utter, gut-wrenching dread, and Agent Miller's face went a shade of pale that she had never seen on a human before, a sickly gray that seemed to drain all the color from his skin. And they looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not as a stereotype, not as a target for their amusement, but as a person who was connected to this man, a man who held their entire future in his hands. And she saw the fear in their eyes, the terror of a mistake so profound it could cost them everything. And the tables had turned, the power dynamic had completely shifted, and they were the ones who were helpless now. They were the ones who were at his mercy. Her husband finally spoke. His voice was not loud, it was not angry. It was a low, even tone that was far more terrifying than any shout could ever be, and he did not look at her. He did not acknowledge her at all. He was a stone monument of professionalism, a perfect, unyielding border agent. And he said, "I take it you had no issues with my wife's documentation." His voice was calm and steady, but there was an undertone, a razor's edge of cold fury that made the hairs on Ilara's arm stand up. And Agent Miller stammered, his words tripping over each other. "No, sir, no issues at all. Everything is in order." And her husband simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that spoke volumes. A nod of a man who knew he was being lied to but did not care to call them on it. A nod that said he would handle this later. A nod that was a promise of a coming reckoning. Then, for the first time, he turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were filled with a love and a concern that she had only ever seen in the privacy of their home. A warmth that was in such stark contrast to his public demeanor that it made her feel weak with emotion. And he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that was meant only for her, a silent apology for the humiliation she had endured, and a promise that she would never have to endure it again. And he said in a voice that was just for her, a voice that was as familiar as her own heartbeat, "I am sorry, my love. I did not know you were coming this way." A simple, private utterance that was not meant for the ears of the two agents who were now standing in a petrified state of utter shock, their bodies frozen in disbelief, their minds surely reeling with the implications of this one small, affectionate phrase, this single, undeniable link between them. A link that meant they were about to face the consequences of their cruel, careless behavior. He turned back to the two agents, and he said in that same cold, emotionless voice, "You may go now." And it was not a suggestion. It was a command, a dismissal. And Agent Miller and Agent Rodriguez stood there for a long, silent moment. Their mouths were open slightly. Their faces were pale, their bodies were frozen, and they were completely and utterly defeated. Their power was gone, their arrogance had evaporated, and they were simply two men who had made a terrible mistake, and they had been caught, and they did not know what to do. They did not know how to react. They were caught between a profound terror of what was to come, and the simple, undeniable fact that their boss, the head of their entire division, was standing there, staring at them, and they had just mocked his wife's accent in his presence. Finally, Agent Miller nodded, a frantic, jerky movement of his head, and he took a shaky step back, pulling Agent Rodriguez with him, and they stumbled backward, back into the booth. Their movements were uncoordinated and clumsy, a testament to their shock and their fear, and Ilara's husband watched them go. His face was a perfect, emotionless mask, and he did not turn away until they had completely disappeared from his view. And then he walked around to her car, opened the passenger door, and he got in, his suit rustling softly as he settled into the seat, and the two of them sat there for a moment in the sudden, peaceful silence, a silence that was a million miles away from the mocking laughter and the cruel words that had filled the air just moments before, a quiet that was a profound relief. He turned to her, his hand reaching out to cover her own on the steering wheel, his thumb tracing a gentle, comforting circle on her skin, and he said softly, "Are you all right, my love? Are you okay?" And Ilara felt the tears prick at the back of her eyes, a sudden, powerful wave of emotion, a mix of relief and humiliation, a wave that she had been holding back for so long, a dam that had finally broken, and she nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. Her voice was choked with a sudden sob, and he squeezed her hand, a silent gesture of understanding, a wordless promise that he would be there for her, that he would protect her from all of this. And he said, "I am so very sorry you had to go through that. I had no idea I would see you here. I was on my way to a meeting with the regional director, a surprise inspection, a bit of a last-minute thing." And he did not say anything about the agents. He did not mention their mockery, their cruelty. He did not have to. She knew that he had seen it all, that he had understood every single moment of her humiliation. He reached over and put the car in drive, his eyes still fixed on her, a loving, concerned gaze, and he said, "Let us go home. Let us get you to your parents. They are waiting for you, and I am sure they have been so worried about you." And Ilara nodded. She took her foot off the brake, and the car began to move. It rolled forward, past the booth where the two agents were surely still in a state of shock, past the border that now felt like a place of welcome rather than a place of dread, and the sun was beginning to set, the fiery orange turning to a soft pastel pink as they drove into the quiet, simple beauty of the desert, a place that was now bathed in a gentle, forgiving light. A place that no longer felt like a prison, but a home. A true home. They drove in silence for a while. The quiet was not awkward. It was a comfortable, peaceful quiet that was filled with an unspoken understanding. An understanding that had been forged in the fire of their love. A fire that had burned brightly through all the years of their lives together. A love that had grown and deepened with every passing moment. And he finally spoke again. His voice a low, gentle rumble. A sound that was as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. And he said, "I know you must have so many questions, my love. So many things you must be wondering about, and I will do my best to answer all of them. Just know that I am so very proud of you. I am so proud of your strength, your quiet dignity, your grace under pressure, and you handled yourself with so much more strength than I would have had. I am so very sorry that I was not there to protect you from that sooner." Alara finally found her voice, a whisper at first, a small tentative sound that grew stronger as she spoke, and she said, "I was not so strong. I was so scared. I felt so small, so helpless, and I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to crawl away into a hole and never come out, and I have never felt so alone in all my life." And she felt the tears finally come, a hot, cleansing stream that traced a path down her cheeks, and her husband reached over and wiped them away with his thumb. His touch was so gentle, so tender, a touch that promised a lifetime of safety and security, a touch that said he would never let her feel that way again, a touch that said he would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect her. And he said, "You are the strongest person I know, my love. You are an absolute force of nature, a thing of such beauty and strength, and I am so lucky to have you in my life. And you will never, ever be alone again. I will not let you be. I will always be with you no matter what happens, no matter what comes our way." They arrived at her parents' house just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, and the house was a small, cozy bungalow with a porch light that was already on, a beacon of welcome in the growing darkness, and her parents were waiting for them on the porch. Their faces were wreathed in smiles, their arms were open, and the reunion was a beautiful, tearful, joyful thing. A moment of pure, unadulterated happiness that seemed to erase all the pain and the humiliation of the day. A moment that was a promise of a better future. A future filled with love and warmth and the quiet, comforting knowledge that she was finally home. And she was with the people who loved her more than anything in the world. And as the night wore on, as the stars began to pepper the inky black sky, and as she sat on the porch swing with her husband, her head resting on his shoulder, she felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling that she had not felt in a very long time. And the incident at the border felt like a distant, terrible memory, a bad dream that had been washed away by the gentle rhythm of his breathing, by the quiet, constant beat of his heart against her ear, a sound that was the most comforting sound in the entire world. And she knew that she was the luckiest woman in the world, a woman who had found a love so profound, a love so powerful, that it had the power to stop time, to change the course of destiny, to silence the cruel laughter of two petty men at a dusty border checkpoint. The very next morning, before the sun had risen, Alara and her husband, whose name was Alexander, were awake, sitting at the kitchen table with cups of steaming coffee, a quiet, peaceful ritual that they had shared for years. And he began to tell her about his job, a job that she had only ever known in vague terms, a job that was shrouded in a cloak of secrecy and security. And he explained his work, a role that was so high up the chain of command, a role that was so important to the country's security, that it was not spoken about, it was not revealed to anyone, not even his own family, a rule that was for their own protection, a rule that he had always followed with a military-like precision, a rule that had caused a small, almost imperceptible distance to grow between them over the years, a distance that they had always overcome with love and patience and a shared commitment to a life that was their own, a life that was separate from his work. And he told her that the border agents, Miller and Rodriguez, were under investigation, a silent, internal review that would surely lead to their dismissal. And he told her that he did not want to make a big show of it, a public display of his power. He wanted to handle it quietly, with the quiet authority that he possessed, an authority that did not need to be shouted from the rooftops, a power that was all the more terrifying for its lack of fanfare. He explained his work as a director of a highly sensitive department within the government, a department that dealt with counter-terrorism, with national security, with the very fabric of the country's safety. And he was the man who made the decisions. He was the man who gave the orders. He was the man who was in charge of a vast, complex web of operations, a web that stretched all over the globe. And he told her about the risks, about the dangers, about the constant state of alertness that he lived in, a state of being that had always felt so foreign to her, so far removed from her simple, quiet life. A life filled with baking and gardening and spending time with her family. And as he spoke, she felt a profound sense of awe, a feeling of wonder and respect for the man she had married, a man who was so much more than the kind, gentle soul who sat across the table from her, a man who was a quiet, unassuming hero, a protector of a nation, and her love for him deepened. It grew with a sudden, powerful ferocity, a love that was now tinged with a new, beautiful shade of respect and admiration. The rest of the week was a peaceful, beautiful blur of family gatherings, of long walks with her parents, of quiet conversations with her husband, and she felt a sense of belonging, a feeling of being completely and utterly at home, a feeling that had been so elusive in her life, a feeling that had been a constant, quiet struggle for her, a struggle that had always been made so much more difficult by the sound of her own voice, by the sound of her own accent, an accent that had always been a target for mockery, a target for ridicule, a marker of her otherness, and she had always felt like a person with a story that was not her own, a person who had to pretend to be something she was not, a person who had to hide a part of herself, a part of her truth. But now, as she sat with her husband, as she listened to the low rumble of his voice, as she watched the love and the adoration in his eyes, she felt a new sense of freedom, a feeling of being completely and utterly herself, a person who was loved for who she was, for all of her quirks, for all of her imperfections, for all of her stories, and her accent no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a part of her history, a part of her soul. And she knew that she would never again try to hide it. She would never again try to smooth it out. She would simply embrace it, a mark of her unique and beautiful identity, a beautiful song of her own making, a melody that her husband loved more than anything else in the world, a sound that was music to his ears. And as they drove back to the city, the journey was filled with a quiet, comfortable joy, a sense of peace that was so profound, it felt like a physical thing, a warm, comforting blanket that was wrapped around them both. And the border crossing was a different experience this time, a simple, swift passage that was conducted by new agents who were professional and polite, and they did not look at her twice. They did not mock her accent. They did not make a joke of her identity. They simply looked at her passport and handed it back to her with a smile and a quiet word of welcome. And she looked at Alexander, her eyes filled with a gratitude that she could not possibly express in words, a gratitude that was a bottomless well of love, a feeling of being completely and utterly safe, a feeling of being completely and utterly loved. The incident with the two agents was a terrible, humiliating memory, a dark stain on her psyche, but it was also a turning point, a moment that had revealed the true depth of her husband's love, the true extent of his quiet, unassuming power, a power that he had never once used for his own gain, a power that he had only ever used for the good of his country and for the protection of his family. And she knew that she was a part of his world, a part of his life, a part of his heart, and he was a part of hers. A man who had seen her at her most vulnerable, a man who had seen her at her most humiliated, a man who had not judged her but had simply offered her a hand, a quiet word of comfort, a silent promise of a forever they had both found in the most unexpected of places, a dusty border checkpoint on a hot, unforgiving desert afternoon. The story of the two agents who had mocked a woman's accent and then frozen in fear when they saw who she was married to was a story that would not be told in the newspapers. It was a story that would not be broadcast on the news. It was a story that would not be made public. It was a story that would only ever be known to a handful of people. A story that was a quiet, powerful testament to the power of love, the power of compassion, the power of a single, small act of kindness in a world that could so often feel so cruel, so unforgiving. A story that would be remembered by Alara and Alexander for the rest of their lives. A story that would serve as a constant reminder of the day that their worlds had collided in the most unexpected of ways. The day that he had been there to save her. The day that she had been there to show him that even in a world of such danger and such secrecy, a world that he was forced to inhabit for his work, there was still room for love, for joy, for a quiet, simple, beautiful life that was their own. A life that was now forever intertwined. A life that was a beautiful, ongoing, ever-unfolding story of its own. The two border agents, Agent Miller and Agent Rodriguez, did not know what was happening to them in the days and weeks that followed. They simply knew that their lives were beginning to unravel with a quiet, terrifying precision. And they were not being called into meetings. They were not being given new assignments. They were being passed over for promotions. And they were being assigned to the most menial, soul-crushing tasks, the kind of tasks that were designed to make a person quit, to make a person just give up, to make a person just walk away from a job that they had worked so hard for, and they were told that there was a review of their performance, an internal, top-secret review that they had no knowledge of, a review that they could not possibly hope to influence, and they knew in their hearts that it had to be about that day, that terrible, humiliating day at the border. The day that they had made a mistake so profound, a mistake so grievous, that it had sealed their fate. They would look at each other with a silent, unspoken dread, and they would see the fear in each other's eyes, a fear that was a mirror image of their own, and they would remember the man in the black suit, the man who had looked at them with a cold, unyielding gaze, a man who had not said a word, but who had conveyed 1,000 unspoken threats, a man who had simply looked at them and looked at the woman with the beautiful, lilting accent, and they would remember the look in his eyes when he had said, "My love." And they would know with a certainty that was as cold and as sharp as a knife that they had just sealed their own fate, that they had just signed their own death warrant, a professional death warrant, and they would be left to wonder for the rest of their lives, to wonder what would have happened if they had just been kind, if they had just been professional, if they had just been a little more humane, a little less cruel. And the irony was not lost on them. The profound and terrible irony that their punishment was so quiet, so subtle, so utterly unceremonious, and they were not being shouted at, they were not being publicly shamed, they were simply being erased, they were being disappeared, they were being turned into ghosts, and they knew that they would be a cautionary tale, a whispered warning to the new agents, a story that would be passed down from one generation of border agents to the next, a story about a man who had a quiet, terrible power, a man who you did not want to cross, a man who had a wife with a beautiful, melodic accent, an accent that was not a weakness but a strength that was backed by a power that they could not possibly have imagined. Meanwhile, Alara and Alexander's life continued, a life of quiet, simple, beautiful joy, and they would talk about that day, a day that had changed everything, a day that had revealed a truth that they had both been too scared to acknowledge, a truth that had now been laid bare, a truth that was as beautiful as it was terrifying, a truth that had bound them together in a way that was more profound, more absolute, more complete than any legal document, than any ceremony, than any public declaration, a truth that was the very foundation of their love, a love that was a sanctuary from the world's cruelty, a love that was a beacon of hope in the darkness, a love that was a testament to the quiet, unassuming power of a single act of compassion, a love that was, in and of itself, a miracle, a small, beautiful, utterly perfect miracle.